Our BBC, Mike had put us on the hook for this video when he preached on Genesis chapter 9. So here we are. And so Mike, a few weeks ago, you were preaching from Genesis chapter 9, where Noah and his family come out the ark, and then God makes a covenant of grace, where he essentially blesses them to actually go and populate the earth. And so as he gives them this covenant of grace, he says these words that you didn't really quite touch on your preach. And he said this, Genesis 9 verse 5, "And for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning from every beast. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image." And so then, Mike, do these verses support capital punishment? And if it does, then how should we as Christians, relate to the topic, the subject of capital punishment? And should governments even be changing the laws so that they could actually be fulfilling this?
Yeah, thanks so much, buddy. I think one of the things you'll remember from my sermon is I had said that this provision and some provisions in here give us almost the thinking behind, or the reason, the justification behind this covenant of grace. And we see here the importance of human life, God's desire to preserve human life on the earth. And so when you read these verses, I think it's not the focus of these verses is not so much on the means of punishment.
That's good.
But rather on the fact that it's about the delegation of the responsibility for carrying out God's justice.
Okay.
So it's not the focus. The focus is not how the punishment should be meted out, but rather that mankind will become responsible for bringing about God's justice in the earth.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that we know from the Bible that mankind is made in the image of God, and so man is capable of representing God in a judicial capacity. Because what these things are saying, these verses are about justice and the responsibility for carrying out God's justice in the earth.
I love what you're saying there about not necessarily about the means by which we fulfill the justice of God, but that we would take on, in a sense, the responsibility to be these image bearers of God. And part of our image bearing is that we will function in judicial ways, ensuring that justice is actually perpetuated in the world. And so would you then say that a responsibility to ensure that justice is met in the world is something that I guess all Christians should actually really care about and be for and participate in?
Absolutely, yeah. I think justice, the justice of God is something that we should be concerned about, what God would think is just, and participating therefore in justice in the world is something that should be front and center. I believe these verses are teaching. And it's quite interesting if you want to think about it in a simple way. If you look at verse 6 where it says, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed." If you want to think about it, the focus over here should rather be on the by man,
okay,
rather than shall his blood be shed.
Okay.
So I think the focus here is mankind's responsibility to enforce God's justice on the earth, and thereby, yes, we should be concerned about justice in the world, and be involved in it absolutely as Christians. Yeah.
And how far does that perhaps extend? So let's think about as man, we should be concerned about, Christian be concerned about justice in the world, see justice be played out. How much of it should be the responsibility of government to do so? And where do we distinguish between government's responsibility to do so and the citizens, in just being good citizens, that we should care or be involved in justice?
We know from the rest of the Bible, from Romans 13 verse 1 specifically, that God has put governing authorities in place, and we should be subject to those governing authorities. And so it is always within that framework and that context where God has given the system of justice almost to the governing authorities, and we participate within the bounds of that system, but concerned with the principles of justice within that system. If that answers your question.
And so then there's no really place where we could say, as Christians, all we care about is about the church and what's happening in the church, and just leave society to the government, and justice issues or just for out there don't concern the church. But we should actually seek for ways in which like there's a balance. Yes, recognizing that God has primarily put government in place to fulfill that, but we should care about justice. And so we should care about being involved, and care about participating, care about seeing the justice and goodness of God actually be lived out in the world.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Yes and amen.
I should have maybe preached that. Cheers.